Beautiful friends, I'm not at home at the moment, so I hope the sound works. You know, it's half a year since the beginning of the war. It was half a year yesterday. And I wanted to just connect with you because we've been having this conversation pretty much for half a year. Many of you have been there from the beginning. And I just wanted to connect and say thank you for coming along on the journey. And maybe say a few almost kind of instinctive rather than analytical things about where we're at. I hope to share a pretty sort of fast-paced analytical video and slightly poetic video about the car bomb that killed Dugin's daughter, hopefully on Sunday, maybe on Monday, I think probably on Sunday. And I'll try to say quite a bit about what's happening inside Russia in that video. But I think that we've got a situation where we have asked questions about what happens with Ukrainian civil society after the war. But I actually think we're very confident about Ukrainian civil society during the war. Ukraine will keep its determination, Ukraine will keep its nerve, in part because such great losses and sacrifices and traumas have been suffered, and at the same time victory over the Russians in the sense of pushing them out absolutely remains a good possibility. But the weak link here is the West. The Russians will do what they can to continue a measured pattern for now with the view to escalating more in the future. But the West is the weak link here, and we're going to be talking about that very soon too on the main channel. How to think of those economic impacts that might be coming our way that are to do with the war. Not all of them are to do with the war, but that are to do with the war. How to psychologically approach them. Like, well, what is it? What am I experiencing here? Is it just an economic inconvenience, or is it part of some kind of a threat that's coming my way? We'll talk about that. But the weak link here is the West, and Ukraine's biggest existential fear is that they are dependent on the United States and then on this block of nations that now you probably can predict where they're going to be a week from now, but can you predict where they're going to be 3 months from now? You're less confident. And Vladimir Putin himself, I think, has not just confidence that over a 10-year course things will change in the West for what he considers to be the better. Democratic disintegration, having Viktor Orban's in power in different European countries, a willingness to negotiate with Russia again, to deal with Russia again. But he's also hopeful that the economic challenges and the economic anxiety in Europe now are going to lead to political crises. And whenever there is a semblance that that is happening, he's happy. So I think that the central story for Ukraine as far as the war goes is about the activation and patience and determination of the West and of the citizens in the West who keep putting pressure on their governments. And as we always say, I don't think that despite the big moral elements here and elements of moral outrage here, this is a moral story fundamentally for the West, because I do think that if Russia were a very stable actor who wanted to do one clear, big aggression and transgression, but with the clear surrounding picture that nothing else would follow from it. That's to say, if Russia was a very different kind of actor to the kind of actor that it is, and the kind of actor that it is, as I said in a pre-war video, an escalation machine. That's what they've got there in the Kremlin, an escalation machine they can't stop. And then the war has a logic of its own. You can't just decide to stop wars either. Ukraine needs to pursue this because it feels it can push these Russians out. Russians can't stop because while they're thinking about it, it's very hard for them to come away without some palpable goodies that they can sell to the country and sell to themselves. So territorial goodies. So this is difficult, but the point is that if Russia were a very predictable actor who wanted to do one big bad thing, as it were, with a clear sense that nothing else would be a worry, the West would let Russia take Ukraine. There's just no doubt about that. If somehow you could visualize a circumstance where then there wouldn't be a worry that this is a wider pattern of escalation, that Russia is aiming actually not at Ukraine but at NATO, at the West, at neighboring countries, so if there was some kind of clear and transparent proof that Russia was a very kind of different actor to the actor it is, Ukraine would be given to Russia. So that's to say that even if you had no moral sympathy at all for Ukraine, this is in part about you if you're in the West. And it's about stopping something that's not going to stop if it's not stopped in Ukraine. Now, something significant happened in the last day or so, in the last hour or so, that's to do with the last hours or so, that's to do with the thing we talk about on the main channel, and that's that totalitarian turn in Russia. We'll be talking about it again on Sunday. And that's that Yevgeny Roizman, who is an ex-mayor of a very big city in Russia, has a very important organization that does good things, has been arrested. And he's the last, arguably, really major political figure to have been arrested. And in some ways it's extraordinary that he hadn't been arrested up until now. But he knew he would be. It was really bizarre that he hadn't been. And you might say, what is going on? Why are these people being kept out of prison for weeks and weeks and months and months and months? I mean, you saw, if you do follow really, really closely Russian politics, how late it was for the regime to arrest Ilya Yashin in Moscow and put him in prison. And this is quite interesting. I actually think that there might be a fairly banal explanation, that it's not just Navalny, but a small list of other people who needs a wink and a nod, who need a wink and a nod from Putin to put them in jail. And Putin may have just been too busy to put Roizman away. That's quite possible. That with the bigger figures, which the machine feels it can't just chew up in its own semi-random way, you need that wink, and Putin is too busy to give it. So there we go. He has given it now. And what's striking about this is that Roizman's been put in prison not for a fabricated charge of the kind that's typically been leveled at Alexei Navalny. He's been put in prison for speaking badly about the Russian army and about the war. So he has basically is a political figure who's been arrested for having a political opinion. They've not fabricated some kind of fraud charge against him. And that's different. And the consistency of that is different. And the degree to which the field has been just obliterated. That all the major figures have been taken away now. That is qualitatively new. And I think that the other new thing is that they're now disinhibited about these reasons. That they don't need to make stuff up, that they can just say you are, speaking badly of our army and of the state, and there you go. And even, and this is what Maxim Katz said in the video earlier today, I think, even Soviet regimes were uncomfortable with overusing this stuff, so they like to use other articles. So this is again part of this story of a totalitarian turn. We'll be talking about it again on Sunday, as we may also briefly talk about this business of fascization, because at the funeral of Daria Dugina, which was broadcast, and it looked like some kind of a Stalinist procession with extraordinary speeches that showed greater disinhibition than ever before about using language that has clear echoes with Nazi Germany. This disinhibition is also, I think, something interesting. That since this particular event, this bomb attack, we've seen a level of disinhibition that we hadn't seen before, in particular from the leader of the so-called Liberal Democratic Party in Russia, Slutsky. That party is a fake party. It's really controlled by the Kremlin and has a certain kind of task, which historically has been to attract radicals on the extreme side of nationalism and xenophobia and sort of keep them in check. So that's that. And I don't see a clear logic of developments from the Russian point of view as far as the war goes, except waiting for periods when various kinds of provocation, blackmail and escalation are possible, and going ahead with those. And we're going to see how that goes. There are 743 stories about what you should and shouldn't believe, really, that have come out after the Dugina killing. And I don't want to talk you through them because, in part, virtually all of them have no substance. The story the Russian regime has come up with is comical. But let me just mention to you one story that's doing the rounds. It comes from Valery Solovey, the guy who often is the initiator of rumors about Putin's health, even though you don't know that that's where they come from when you read them in Western papers. And he said something that I don't endorse and have no way to endorse, so it's just gossip. But to give you a sense of what's swimming about in the water, he said that he has been told that there are some discussions going on within the Kremlin about whether to escalate or to de-escalate the war, and that de-escalation is the less preferred option, but as it's still being vaguely kept as an option, they needed to send some signals to the ultra-radicals that in the case of a de-escalation, they shouldn't be overly critical of the regime. Well, whatever version you are tantalized by, and I'll put a few on the table on Sunday, briefly, very briefly, because I don't think it brings value to discuss these things in detail, even though it's very, attractive to gossip. But the key thing, I think, to be aware of is that quite certainly it's possible to presume that whoever did it may have had an interest in escalation at home and escalation abroad. And we'll touch on all of that. We'll touch on all of that soon. So thank you for being part. Thank you for being part of this. We're just beginning, and I'm very grateful to you all, especially since you've survived this very, very jumbled conversation with me. Much love.